Hey guys, what's up? Today I want to show you where to start in the amazing series that is Suikoden. Take this as if it was a beginner's guide video into the franchise. I'm also going to showcase the timeline and talk a little bit about it because most of these games are connected in terms of story. They all take place in the same world. That's right. Alright guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and let's begin. Suikoden is a role-playing game series that started back in 1995 on the PlayStation. Developed by Konami and spearheaded by Yoshitaka Murayama, it's become a very popular franchise nowadays that's tragically dead, soon to be revived by Murayama himself and his company under the name Eiyuden Chronicle. As for Suikoden, 10 official titles were released, 5 main entries and 5 spin-offs. If you want to get into this series, it's probably because you've seen how awesome and original they look. Their major characteristics spiraling around the recruitment of 108 characters as the Stars of Destiny, and of course, its 3 different battle mechanics on the 5 main titles. Getting into Suikoden can be done pretty easily as each game out there is a standalone title. However, they're all connected since they take place in the same world. Only the main entries and a few spin-offs though, but we'll get to that later. Nonetheless, all of them have their own story, characters, and political conflict, so they're all over the place. You can literally just start with the title that appeals the most to you. I personally recommend starting with the very first Suikoden as it is the beginning of the series. It's a fantastic game and it's quite short. Even if you recruit all 108 characters, you'll probably do less than 20 hours. And then you'll be ready for the masterpiece that is Suikoden 2, its direct sequel. The first Suikoden is balanced, it's amazing, and it's a perfect entry for beginners into the series. Now, if you really care that much about the timeline, there's another way to start with this series. Like I said, the games are all over the place. Pretty much like the E series, those take place in the same world but weren't released in chronological order. Suikoden is the same. The timeline is as follows. The very first game in the series is actually Suikoden 4. It takes place 150 years before the first Suikoden, and it focuses on the initial problems of the powerful runes. It also shows the history of how the Kuluk Empire started expanding throughout the islands all around. However, you've probably heard some bad things about the design of this game. While the story and characters are totally fine, it's true it suffers from some tedious navigation and lackluster gameplay. But I can easily vouch for the regular turn-based battle system and its duels. In fact, I think the duels here are the best ones in the entire series. Suikoden 4 is still a great game, but it is among the worst in the series. Nevertheless, if you want to start into this franchise by following the timeline in order, this is the one for you. Next is Suikoden Tactics, which is a companion to 4. It has a prologue that acts as a prequel to it, but then it becomes a direct sequel. Several characters from the Suikoden 4 actually make a comeback here, and some of them are playable. Do you need to play this though, considering it's not a regular Suikoden, but now a grid-based strategy RPG? Not necessarily, but then again, if you're so bent on playing them in order, you kinda have to. Suikoden 5 takes place 6 years before the first Suikoden, but in an entire different part of the world, which means its events actually happen 144 years after Suikoden 4. There were rumors for a time back then that the developers were planning a Suikoden 6 taking place during that huge 150 years gap, but Konami killed the series and of course that never happened. Now, Suikoden 5 is my favorite and I think it's the best in the series, even though original creator Murayama had nothing to do with it. Problem is the only way to play this is by getting the physical version or by emulating it. Sadly, it's very expensive and it doesn't have a digital release anywhere. Suikoden 1, 2, and 3 are follow-ups to one another. Suikoden 2, which you've probably heard is one of the best in the series, takes place only 3 years after the first Suikoden. Again, it's a different part of the world with different characters and conflict. For the most part, because these two games are also very connected, just like Suikoden 4 and Tactics. In fact, a few characters, including two main ones like Victor and Flick, are just as important here in Suikoden 2. This is why I told you earlier that the first Suikoden is the best place to start. In between Suikoden 2 and 3 there are two visual novels in case you're interested. Suikoden 1 and 2 released on the PlayStation only in Japan, but they're fully fan translated. If you're still interested in playing these games in order, you gotta play these two after Suikoden 2. Nash, the protagonist in them, is actually a very important supporting character in Suikoden 3. And speaking about that game, it's quite different from the others. For starters, it has 4 main characters with the story being divided into several chapters. No silent protagonist like in the other main games. Plus, developers went very experimental with the battle mechanics, and it developed a reputation for being the hardest to get into. I agree, I love this game to pieces and I still strongly recommend it, but it isn't a good place to start. So what happened after Suikoden 3 in terms of timeline? Nothing really. After the big commercial failure that was the masterpiece Suikoden 5, Konami developed a few more spin-offs. Suikoden Tear Cries was one of them, released on the Nintendo DS, not connected at all to any other Suikoden whatsoever. It takes place in an entirely different universe, it's way more comedic, and it only has one battle system. No more duels or war battles. It's still a pretty darn good game though. Is it a good one to start with? Sure, but if you jump next into any of the other main titles, you'll notice a huge difference. Finally, we got a PSP release, the last Suikoden ever so far. Unfortunately, it's exclusive to Japan and it doesn't have a fan translation. Without understanding Japanese, there's little to no point in playing this game. Plus, once again, it's completely unrelated to all the other titles in the series. Are any of these games any hard? Not really, they all have some challenging missions or tough boss battles, but not anything brutal. Hardest in my opinion will be Suikoden 3 and 5, but they're still pretty balanced. In conclusion, if you don't care about the timeline, I recommend starting from the beginning, the first Suikoden, because Suikoden 2 and 5 are equally amazing and are the best in the series in my opinion. If you start with those, it will be somewhat hard to move on with the others. Now, if you do care about the timeline, then you're gonna have to start with the Black Sheep, Suikoden 4. I insist, ignore the critics, play it, and judge the game for yourself. Maybe you'll love it, who knows? To end this video, I'll show the timeline with the games in chronological order. I really hope you get into this series, it's critically acclaimed for very good reasons, and I'm pretty sure you've seen me praising it dozens of times in the past. Thanks for watching, and good luck!